The Tal Memorial tournament starts this Thursday in Moscow. It's a really strong lineup. There's the big three, Anand, Carlsen and Kramnik, and also Karyakin, fresh from his victory in Norway chess. There's also Nakamura, Caruana, Gelfand, Morozevich. I mean, really, really strong. Of course, all eyes will be on Anand and Carlsen as they prepare for their World Championship match later this year. Anand has played so much in this first half of the year, and there are signs that he's playing himself a little bit back into form. He scored 5 out of 9 in Norway chess, lost in the last round, but he did have some tremendous games there. If you think about his game against Topalov, for example, that was classic Anand, where he used the initiative just to really sweep Topalov off the board. And I'd like to look back at a classic Anand performance from 2009 against Vladimir Kramnik from the Monaco Rapid Play tournament. In fact, this game was not only a rapid play, 25 minutes for all the moves, but also a blindfold game. And the skill with which Anand played this was just, well, out of this world. Let's take a look at the game. So Anand against Kramnik, Monaco 2009, and it was a Petrov. I know there are a lot of you that like to see the whole game, so I'm going to go through right from the very start. I haven't got time to comment on all these moves, but this is one of the main lines, you could say. And it looks as though Black is, well, almost ahead in development here. It looks as though Black might be able to take the initiative with this knight in the middle of the board and development of the bishops. In fact, because Black hasn't castled here, it's not easy for him to hold his position together and hold that knight on e4, and White actually gains time by attacking the centre, d5, and the knight on e4. But this is a very well-known position indeed, so White now develops. Again, I repeat, the important thing is that Black hasn't castled yet, so can't hold on to that knight on e4. And here is the first critical position. It turns out that White actually has some initiative here. So Queen h5, threatening a crude mate on h7, and also the pawn on d5. Now the old move here was to play pawn to f5, defending against both threats, but in fact this leaves a huge hole on e5, which White is able to exploit in this manner. And now the important move, bishop f4, exchanging off these bishops, and once those are exchanged, then you can see that White is able to occupy the e5 square, and this bishop is a very poor piece indeed, and White has a big positional advantage there. But it was discovered, I think Yusupov might have been the first to play this move, I'm not quite sure, but this has become very popular. Giving up the pawn on d5, but after this move, suddenly Black is able to develop. The queen is a little bit vulnerable in the middle of the board, and of course there are 2 pawns that are attacked in this position. This has been played in hundreds of games actually. Anand brings his bishop out, okay, a very threatening position. And now, which pawn do you save? Well, he decides to make a virtue out of defending this h-pawn and launches the pawn into the attack. We've seen this on many occasions, that the h-pawn is a very useful lever to just prise open the enemy king. The great thing about when you attack with the h-pawn is you don't compromise your own king position. It's a bit different when you attack with the f-pawn. That's a little bit more risky, although some of us like to do that when we play the Grand Prix attack. That's another story. Okay, so Black takes back the pawn. Now, very double-edged position, White trying to attack on the king side, but these pieces potentially a little bit vulnerable, and Black's piece is very active in the centre. Anand defends the bishop. Of course, Black can't really take there because there'll be a discovered attack. So Kramnik exchanges off this dangerous bishop on h6. This is sensible. And now probably the best move is to play king takes f8. And, well, incredibly, it's possible for Black to survive this attack that was played in a later game, but it's very, very complicated. Instead, I think understandably, Kramnik played his rook up the board, attacking the queen, The queen moves and only then recaptured the bishop. The point of playing the rook here first was to prevent white advancing the h-pawn. But here is where Anand started to play rather brilliantly. Okay, bishop e4 is a pretty obvious move, and Kramnik wants to keep the rook on the 5th rank to stop this pawn advancing. Now Anand would like to use the d-pawn, would like to advance this. This is also quite a trump, or potentially quite a trump in white's hand. But at the moment, of course, that's not possible because the pawn is pinned. So first of all, rook c1, okay, again, pretty obvious move, just driving the queen back. And now this next move, I think, is, well, for me, rather unusual. It's, I think, very clever indeed. I mean, perhaps the most obvious move for white here is to play bishop f3 to drive the rook away and then perhaps h5. But I think here black is probably okay. I can imagine that Anand looked at this and thought, well, I mean, one thing is this exchange sacrifice is actually quite tempting. White's kingside pawns have been shattered. At the moment, there's reasonable control over d5, but I mean, this looks very dangerous indeed, looking at this pawn. But there's also perhaps just queen takes a2 here, and that keeps control over the d5 square. So not bishop f3. Anand played instead f3. Now the reason I kind of look at this with surprise is, it's quite a slow move seemingly, but also, it weakens this diagonal a little bit, weakens the 2nd rank. So if this goes wrong for white, then his king could really suffer. But in fact, well, it's a very dangerous move indeed. The idea is to play g4, to drive out the rook and to play h5. I mean, it's a really crude way of playing the position. And as I said, double-edged. But, well, Anand had calculated very well. I repeat, this is a blindfold, rapid game. It could be that black's best move here is just to retreat and allow white a certain initiative in this endgame. But this is, I mean, it's difficult for black because his rook is rather offside, and this is a dangerous passed pawn. Let's see what might happen if black allows the g-pawn to advance. Then h5, and you can see how dangerous this is. I mean, it's a possible threat to take here, possibly h6, depending on how black plays. Now, this isn't forced, but let's just see what happens if black were to take this pawn. I mean, this shows you how dangerous it can be. If this is taken, then queen g5 check wins now because there are too many pieces on the bishop. And if the bishop goes back, then this is deadly. You take here and take the bishop, and it's all over. So that's what could happen if the g-pawn is allowed to advance. So Kramnik preempted the advance with rook b5. Now, the queen, rook, and bishop still cover the d5 square, so it's not possible to advance the pawn. Also, still not possible to advance the h-pawn. I suspect that Kramnik might have overlooked Anand's next move, which is very clever indeed. Very easy to overlook. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back. The move that just tips things over in Anand's favour. Basically, black can't keep control over d5 now. If queen takes a4, now d5 is possible. And, well, now either h5 or d6. I think both these moves are extremely dangerous. And white's initiative is really powerful. So Kramnik played instead rook b6, hoping to drive white's queen away from its threatening position on f6. But of course it does allow d5. There we go, bishop f5. So rook takes f6 threatened, but now d6, and Kramnik in terrible trouble now. He exchanged and played queen takes a4. I mean, one of the threats there was perhaps just e5, e6. Now the pawn can't advance at the moment, but Anand used his h-pawn, h5. The pawn can't advance to h6 because of queen e3 check, and the h-pawn is on prise. But Anand had a very cool response here, queen to e7. If this is exchange, if queens are exchanged, then white wins with rook d8. If queen f4, preventing h6, then simply d7, and the pawn is going to go through. And you'll notice that there's no check here. That's rather important. So the king is just about safe enough. Kramnik played queen b4, but now h6, and it's all over. If queen b2 to prevent white's queen coming to f6, then unfortunately this is the end. Checkmate. Kramnik played rook c6, but now queen f6 and queen g7 mate on the next turn. Tremendously played by Anand. It'd be great if we saw such form from him in the Tal Memorial tournament starting this Thursday. I'm going to be commentating on round 1 on playchess.com. Do join me.